Darren, you have some thoughts about this, both in your current role at Make as well as your prior history at working in automation and across a variety of marketing
Sure.
tasks.
Yeah, I think I'll pick up on what Tuba mentioned as maybe the hot take of data quality, and so I think so. We all agree that data quality matters. That data going into these agentic systems is going to be what actually differentiates one well-designed system and agency versus another that has unpredictable outcomes. But I think it's worth identifying why has data quality always been a challenge. If we look at specifically in go-to-market efforts, we all know the well-known, well-worn memes about trying to get salespeople to enter data into Salesforce or whatever the CRM. Like that's been the push for years and years and years. And so we end up with bad data, and we're always trying to get them to their data and turn it into deterministic, very fine data points. But I think that's one of the greatest opportunities with AI generally. Just generative AI is very good at capturing call notes from a sales call, identifying the relevant data points, and of course, using those in a much more qualitative manner than a highly deterministic. You always have to have the data in the exact same structure. So in some ways, I think the data quality thing is going to be less of a challenge for organizations to nail really effectively. And AI agent systems are actually very good at dealing with this more kind of nuanced data as opposed to these kind of, old school data structures. You got to get everything in the exact same format and perfect quality.
Mhm. Excellent. And so, as you're dealing with these kind of call it less nuanced, more conceptual systems, we are also dealing with the challenge of having these agents that are trying to conduct multiple steps and multiple workflows and engaging with each other. So, Sean, you brought up earlier the idea of agents working with each other, the idea of this agency of agents. How do you keep agents from frankly, forgetting what they're trying to do before they get to the end point? When we're talking about these more complex go-to-market processes, these projects, these multi-layered conceptual capabilities.
Yeah, not to be the dead horse. I definitely think like the framework that you use and how you've constructed your framework to take advantage of understanding some degree of state knowledge, as well as like how you deal with kind of in context, short term and long term memory, is super important when dealing with situations where you may start something on day one and not revisit it until day 15 and then want to reflect on something that happened on day 7. Like you have to have in place mechanisms that support this. We certainly take a perspective of this is not just about like an application. Like we're thinking about a system, right? There's a systems thinking perspective that you need to have about orchestrating this environment of agents. It has taken a lot of thought. Like when it comes to things like data, like we have an agent that deals with data quality, right? And if something's not good, it pushes back and says, you know what, this is inadequate. This is not good. This is not what would be considered gold standard to be a part of the input to go into kicking off, the planning and subsequent workflows. You have to, and this is where the hundreds of agents come in because you're having to kind of think about, well, what am I trying to accomplish? How am I going to find, if you will, the right place in the model's distribution? And of course, like it's not even just always about the model. You can use all sorts of, algorithms and approaches to getting one of these systems to work as expected. So I think it is around like taking like a systems point of view on building these things and giving them their own little like realm to work in. And well, let me back. It takes good design,
Mm.
good design before jumping in with all of this. Someone mentioned DeepSeek is like these models aren't. If you're using like an yeah, your own hosted version of any model, and nothing is learning. These models, except for if it's Tuba, doing liquid stuff, these models are static, right? They don't just learn because it happened. It learns because there's a system that is keeping track of information that it references as a part of the context window. And it feels like it learned something, but it's just referencing something else, right? So I have a lot of customers who will talk about, oh, is this thing gonna learn? Like
Yeah.
nothing, it doesn't work like that, right? And I think that's a point of clarification we should make sure is out in the world. Learning is a very intentional activity, not something that just happens because I said, hello to something,
AI, magic.
Magic.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
not, it's like anything else. Like if you want a computer vision model, you had to train on a ton of stuff.
Mhm.
These large language models are fixed. So except for the liquid ones.
Oh,
Mhm.
I empathize with that point so much because I feel like every enterprise account that you get into, RFPs are really, really long. And the number one question
Number
they're trying to
one.
get out of it is like, yes, like, are you training on my data? So I agree with you. There needs to be some clarity around that. I also think the definition of privacy changes because I
Mm.
think that a lot of times the hang up to like not sharing your data to train things is like this other party is getting this unfair advantage. When folks start getting, paid for the data that they're sharing on an individual level, on an organization level, then I feel like that barrier doesn't go away, but it changes quite dramatically. So I can see a future state where I'm incentivized to have better models out there because as an organization, I function better if there are better models out there. So I'm incentivized to then also say, I'll share some data, trade you for like some amount of dollars against the data that I'm sharing in order for your models to get better. So I think there's like a new services layer there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Ed, I was curious from your perspective when you think
Sure.
about strategic goals and maintaining that attention. How are you balancing, the need for that personalization and actual goal attainment versus the balance of actually keeping things private?
So personalization versus keeping them private, I mean, that is a challenge because, when you look at, and IBM put that out a while ago that we would back up any kind of liability issues when you're talking about, copyright, et cetera. But, it's one of those things where, you know, private, how do you define that? And then personalization, it's like we have to give them permission to whatever entity we're going in and pulling the data and interacting with. That's kind of kicks it off, starts it off. And so, I mean, that kind of enables some of the privacy issues that may come up. And so I think of a perspective as more from like the user side when you talk about privacy and then personalization itself. And getting back to like agents learning, correct in the sense that they don't really learn that deep except some of the newer type agents that are being developed, but they do look at the task and see, okay, Ed Corno went out and every Friday at 4 p.m. he has a meeting. That agent will automatically then set up that meeting. See what I'm saying? So there's certain restrictions based on the tasks that are done. So those agents will analyze that task, come up with a task like type creation, and then execute on it, and then do an assessment and then adapt from it.
Yeah.
And I've
Just
seen
not the
that multiple
model.
times
Just not the
across.
model. That's
Yeah.
what I was saying. Not the model. It does that.
Right,
Like, but agents with memory and all that for
right,
sure.
right. And then from like the actual language models, when you take a look at, say, LangChain, which is what we use consistently, and we have Granite, that's our large language model at IBM. But you got Meta too with Llama and others, right? And Deep with Google. But all those all have kind of, I think, issues in the sense of you want to go with the small language models because it doesn't take up a lot of compute. It's easier to manage. The data quality is better. The agents are easier to come from and actually give birth to. So, I mean, there's a lot of advantage from going that direction. But as far as like privacy versus personalization, that's a really kind of nebulous area, except that, the governments of the world and laws are coming about and saying, especially over in Europe, privacy is a big concern. And so the permission side is easier here in the United States than it is over in Europe and other countries.
Mhm.
But I think that's going to change to a certain degree. And I think maybe if everybody saw on the news recently that basically Google can take your information if you give it permission to do it, to then use and build out any kind of model they want. And so that actually was handed down, I guess, a week or so ago in the United States. So, I mean, those are the things to think about when you're going out and giving okay permission to, say, go on Copilot or ChatGPT. You got to be concerned about, all right, is this going to impact my privacy?
Thanks. So as we're talking about bringing models into production, obviously, this is not just about a proof of concept. This is about maintaining agents as ongoing systems and in production. And so what needs to be taken into account, because this is actually a pretty complex challenge. We're talking about data access, putting some sort of model on top of that, having some sort of agent interface that you have customized, and then regulating the outputs, right? So we've got this kind of sandwich or stack or what have you. I know, Omer, you had some thoughts here, so I'll start with you.
Sure. So I think that again, I'm going back to kind of defer to Sean. Sean, I think that that's what I do most of this discussion. So apologize for that. But I think that he mentioned kind of it's just not using just a model is a system. And I don't remember who coined the phrase of kind of cognitive system. How do you make those thinking machines, thinking system that have their guardrails and have the access to the data and how you build agent on top. And I think that when you go into production and you're trying to think about how you move this, how do you get, it's not moving into production, it means getting the value out of the system, getting the ROI back of the system. When you think about that, you need to think about how the system end to end will work. Like how do you do the guardrails? How do you make sure the data quality is there? How every part of that system works in tandem in order to get to your desired outcome and then the ROI on the other side of that. So I think that when we think about moving things into production, we're actually thinking about all of the I don't want to say little details, but it's big details in many cases that are comprising that you need to do in order to push that into actual production system. How do you make sure that the data is there? How do you make sure that the non-deterministic flow will actually work in at least X% of the time? You need to define the KPI, you need to define the evals to actually run that. So I think that that's kind of the main point. When you want to push something to production, start with thinking about the system and not as an API call. It's not a wrapper over an API, but actually what the system is in order to get the ROI back.